Greetings everyone and welcome to this webinar. Today we will be discussing about the impact ISO 9001 revisions will have on your business and quality management systems. My name is Arta Lamani, the PCB organizer of this webinar, and the guest for today is Sheryl Anderson, Managing Director for Quality System Solutions and Initiatives and Certified Trainer for HACCP ISO 9001 and ISO 22000. Please feel free to write your questions and comments in the question box in the right-hand control panel, or you can use the raise hand function. We will unmute you and you will have a chance to ask the question directly. Sheryl will answer to all questions accordingly at the end of the presentation. Please, Sheryl, you may start the presentation. Thank you.
Hi, good morning everyone. It's really good to have you this morning. I'm excited about sharing my thoughts on the revisions of the standard and the implications to your business, your QMS. I hope you share the same level of excitement about the revisions and you're basically excited and enthusiastic to implement in your organization or carry your organization through the transition. Now, what we need to understand about the revisions, they are addressing some very vital business issues that were brought up by persons or organizations who have used the standard, and the technical committee has responded based on those issues. I also like the logical flow of a standard and the idea that we can actually integrate it with the other standards such as the 14001 standard, or we can with the other important standards that we use from time to time. So that is one of the good characteristics of the changes made to this particular standard. Now, the topics that we're going to cover today, we look at the major revisions of the ISO 9001 standard very briefly because you would have gone through this in some other webinar, but because my role here today is look at how it's going to impact on your business or your QMS. We're going to look at the main business processes within the organization and their interactions. We're going to be looking at preventive action versus risk management. And as you know, that is one of the major changes within the standard. I am excited about the fact that we're focusing a lot more on the process approach and the interaction of those processes. We'll take a look at that as well. There's greater focus on leadership and the operationalization of the strategic plans. We'll talk about the management representative, the importance of people, of ensuring that we have an effective management system, and we're going to do some detoxing as it relates to documentation, and we'll discuss that further. We'll be looking at stakeholders versus suppliers and some minor changes and clarifications within the standard. Now, with the quality management, this is how I describe quality management visually. And here we have three aids here speaking about analyze, attitude, and behavior. Now, this is what quality effort is about. When we talk about analyze, we're talking about the technical understanding and the interpretation of the requirements of the ISO 9001 and you're interpreting it in the as relates to your own business. And then when you put that with attitude, we talk about attitude. How is it that you go ahead and apply these requirements? I know you may have resistance to change whenever you are implementing within the organization, but one of the biggest things about implementing ISO 9001 or any of these international standards, how do you get persons to change their attitude towards ensuring consistent quality or making sure that our customers are always happy? And then add that to behavior. Now, when they understand the intent of the requirement and it's implications and what it means to your business, that is when change actually happens. And that is what we term quality management. So it's analysis, the attitude, and the behavior that leads to that change in always ensuring quality and giving the best quality to my customers. Now, some of the revisions that we have seen, without going too much into it, is the reclassification of preventive action to risk-based thinking. There is more of a focus on risk-based thinking right throughout the standard, from the planning stage through to the operations, right through the measurement aspect as well. There was a minuscule reference to preventive action. Actually, risk management was actually implicit, but it wasn't as it's not as explicit as it now is in the 2015 standard, and that is one of the biggest positives for the change. When we speak about focus on process approach, we're talking about the sequence of interaction of processes. Too many times our companies operate in silos, and our processes are not communicating effectively with each other. So there's now more of a focus on the people within our organization understanding how does one process affect the other. How does procurement affect production? If I procure raw material which is not of good, has not met the specifications, clearly I am not going to produce the requisite quality to give to my customers. So there's now an understanding that we need to focus on this aspect a little bit more, not just from a leadership point of view, but letting our people understand that we affect each other. There's also the focus on leadership, and we termed it top management. But if you put top management versus leadership together, I find that leadership, just the term leadership, it connotes a more important term, and there is more focus on accountability of leadership in our organizations. There is an expansion and focus of people. There's they have now termed control of documents and control of records under documented information, and we have removed that part about mandatory procedures. So we are now focusing on documented information. So there's an integration between records and documents. There is no separation per se. We are now calling our suppliers. We're not just only focusing on our suppliers, we're focusing on our external providers. So it is not just the upstream aspect of it where we just focus on let us evaluate our suppliers. But what about evaluating our distributors? What about evaluating the persons who, the truckers, the people who we contract to transport our product? So these are external providers of products and services, and the standard focuses a lot more on this, understanding understand what external providers are, not just limited to suppliers. There's no reference to management representative, and some may look at it as a good or a bad thing. Usually you may find you may have a quality manager within the organization. However, you find that the quality manager had the burden of ensuring quality in the organization, and then all other managers basically say, okay, yes, it's the quality manager's responsibility. But the removal of the management representative ensures that quality is on the backs of all of the senior managers, all of the leaders within the organization. So I would think of it as a good thing. I did a poll with some persons within a session, and the management representatives or the quality managers within the organization indicated that it's going to take some time to transition, and with behavior it will take time, but what the management representative has to understand that you have to release some of these responsibilities to the other managers within the organization. In the new standardizer, the revised standard, there is also a clarification between competence and awareness. And I'm glad for that clarification because there was some sense of confusion. And I think the standard outlined it pretty well. And it's something that we're going to look at a little bit later on. And there's another revision as the removal of the quality manual. But we're going to examine all of these revisions and look at the implications of these revisions. So just to give you an idea of what they, just very briefly, tell you what the normal business processes are within an organization. We talk about research and development, design, sales and marketing, manufacturing, quality control, distribution, customer service, and then you have supporting these core processes. You have the finance and accounting, and you also have HR, management, and maintenance. Now, these are the processes that we manage on a daily basis, and understand that these are not generic to all organizations, but small business have to understand, and sometimes you have the head cook and bottle washer managing all of these different processes. But this is just an example of business processes that exist typically in an organization. Now let us focus on the revisions and their implications. When we are doing risk management, we need to adopt a sense of root cause analysis within the business context. In other words, we want to determine what can possibly go wrong, whether it's from a proactive analysis or from a reactive analysis where we say, what did go wrong? But let us examine the business first of all. As a business, one of the first things that we need to do, and the standard brings that out very explicitly, is that we need to perform a proactive analysis to identify the significant risks that are affecting our business. What can go wrong? What could go wrong? What are the consequences of these actions? What are the causes? So before we even start to operate, this is the ideal situation. We are really supposed to find out what are the possible things that go wrong. And then now this leads us into setting up our management systems. And our management system includes our equipment design, our processes, our procedures, our employee screening, who do we put in leadership, how do we measure, what are our maintenance strategies for our equipment, etc. That is how we operate on a daily basis. That is our management system, and we have a quality management system. How do you set up these systems to always ensure quality? However, during our operations, incidents occur or failures will occur. There's a saying that says you want to ensure that everything goes wrong, but things happen. Things normally happen, and these are the failures that occur on it occurs on a normal basis. But if we do proper proactive analysis, it will reduce the number of unacceptable failures and losses and inefficiencies within the organization. However, we still have to set up our system in a way to also have active analysis, and that is where a corrective action comes in, to say, even though I planned, I did my risk assessment, I set up my management system, something went wrong, but we need to do a reactive analysis to say what went wrong and what are the consequences of these actions. So this is the business context. And I'm showing you this business context to now segue into to understanding the business from an external context, but with a focus more on risk management. So as I said, good things are planned, but bad things happen. But we want to prevent as much bad things as possible. The standard does not say how you go about carrying out risk analysis or risk evaluation or setting up your risk management system, but I just provided some tools that you can use to examine your business from an external context. And these include the SWOT analysis. Most persons are familiar with that. And SWOT analysis, look at your strengths, that you can leverage, the weaknesses, that you can make improvements on, the opportunities that you can take advantage of, and also the threats that can retard my growth as a business. I'm sure you have heard about PESTEL, talking about the political risk, economic risk, sociocultural, technological, environmental, and legal risks. And we are basically forcing persons to look at, for businesses actually, to look at what are the risks associated with associated with the business, whether it's from a political point of view or from a legal aspect. This is something that every business should do. And there's also Porter's 5 forces that you can use, where you look at supplier power, buyer power, etc. But I won't get into that too much. I'll look at failure mode and analysis later on. But risk analysis, you have to look at it from an external context as well as an internal context, and there are certain risks that also exist within our organization. Let us look at our governance structure. I was part of a certification body which was owned by government. There's a risk associated with a politician trying to influence the decision on certification. So I have to understand or identify that as a risk, but I have to ensure that I put in mitigation plans to guard against that risk, because it is important for the certification body to provide certification that is transparent and independent. But this is something that is identified as a risk, and it is important for you to make sure that you safeguard against those risks. Your procedures can be a risk. It could be too complex. It could be too simple. So you can examine that as well. Even our culture can be, our organizational culture can also be a risk and retard our growth. We can also look at the relationship that we have with our external stakeholders, whether it is with our suppliers or our contractors. We want to look at what risk exists in that type of relationship. Risk also exists as it relates to our capabilities. Do I have enough cash flow? Do I have the right people within my organization? Are they qualified? Do they have the requisite training? What about the technology that I have? Am I using technology that existed from the 1970s when I've now entered the new frontier where everything information can be sent within a millisecond, but yet I'm sending letters which will take a week. So we have to be looking at the risk associated with each of these contexts, whether it's from an external or from an internal context. Let me just back up a bit to look at the failure mode and effects analysis. What that tool does, it looks at all our processes within our organization, whether it is the production process, the distribution process, and it identifies the risk associated with these processes, and then now you can put mitigation plans in place. So at another time you can research about failure mode and effects analysis, what we call FEMA, and see how well it can work for your business. But I just put it there as a tool that I used and I thought was very effective. So the implications of doing proper risk management: better forecasting, because I now understand what my competitors, what my competitive rivalry is. I forecast better, and now I can, because I've assessed my competitive rivalry and I've put the treatment options in place, I now have a better advantage. I now have a better forecasting of my customers' current needs and my customers' future needs. I forecast better know what are the technological changes that I need to put in place because I've looked at what are the technological risks. So now that I've assessed those risks, I become more proactive. I become more predictive rather than reactive. Because sometimes you go in an organization and you find that there's a lot of firefighting rather than problem preventing. And we want to focus on rewarding the problem preventer rather than the firefighter. If we have proper risk management in place also, it's more likely for me to trust you more. You are a more credible organization. If I am going to buy stocks on the stock exchange and I see you as an organization that does your proper risk management or your risk assessment or your risk treatment, I'm more likely to buy your stocks. So I have more trust or more confidence in you as a business, which would lead me to buy your stocks. So those are the implications. There's more trust from your customers because you have assessed those risks and you have put those treatment options in place. But let me focus on this very important point about lowering your cost associated with failure. If I focus more on risk management or problem prevention, the cost associated with failure will be reduced. If you look at your balance sheet, and I'm going to challenge you, say after the implementation of this standard, after 2 years, look at your balance sheet and see what is the impact of risk management on your balance sheet, because it lowers your failure costs, it lowers the expenditure associated with defects. Your expenditure associated with returns or recalls should be reduced. So if I spend more on problem prevention, and just to clarify what I'm talking about, when we talk about quality costs, we have expenditure on prevention, expenditure on appraisal, and there's also expenditure on failure. Now, when we do risk management, the money that we spend on prevention would be things like training or expenditure associated with supplier evaluation or market research or planning. Appraisal costs would be money that we spend on testing or auditing, while there's also an expenditure associated with failures. And you'll see that in your balance sheet, the waste, the customer returns. Based on what we are seeing in this graph here, many studies have been carried out and it have shown that prevention cost is inversely proportional to failure costs. In other words, if I focus more on prevention, or if I focus more on spending on training or conducting evaluation of my suppliers or doing proper market research or better planning, what we find is the cost associated with defects and returns and rework lowers. And there's a direct or inverse proportional correlation between the prevention cost and the failure cost. And because our practitioners recognize this is why it is now encapsulated within the standard. And it, for want of a better word, forces our businesses to take a more risk-based approach to managing the organization. And I've said quite a lot of that. I could go even further, but we are limited in time. So what I can tell you that we can use the ISO 31000 as a guide as to how we go about doing risk management, and I'm sure PECB offers those courses on risk management based on the 31,000 standard. Now let us focus a little bit on process approach. The implications of having or approaching it in terms of understanding the interlinkages within the different processes of the organization. You're going to have improved communication across the different departments. You'll have, if you have better communication across departments, you're going to have even more motivated internal customers. Normally, when a survey is conducted within an organization, you find that one of the biggest problems or biggest issues is communication. And communication, not just leadership to people, but communication across the different departments as well. So if you adopt the process approach, in other words, each employee understands that my output becomes input for your process. And if I don't do my job well, it is going to affect the process downstream. If we can ensure that, we'll have a better service delivery, better product quality. So the process approach improves the communication across the departments, and it even motivates the internal customers, and it leads to better teamwork. They will understand the contribution and the importance of their role in ensuring that we make the same good quality product. So whether I'm from HR, whether I'm from procurement, whether I'm from marketing, everybody within the organization is responsible, accountable for making sure that our customers are satisfied. In the process approach as well, if we examine our processes and map our processes, we'll see where there are some non-value added activities. So we can remove those bottlenecks, we can institute more value added activities, and we can improve our customer service delivery. Remember that the customer only sees one process. They see a single process regardless of how complex the internal processes are. And with the onslaught of the me generation, is all about me, proliferated by the selfie. You have to understand the customer. They don't care what happens in the back room as long as I am satisfied. And the technical committee understands that. And that is why there's more of a focus on the process approach to ensure that what we get, always getting an excellent grade for the service that is offered to our customer. Because as I said before, the customer only sees one process, regardless of how complex your internal processes are. Let us focus a little bit on leadership. We recognize, and I'm going to say ISO 9001 recognizes that there is a deficit of leadership within our organization. Most times when you have issues within the organization, people complain about top management commitment. I see this all the time, even implementing in some of our companies, where there's an absence of commitment to the process. Now, when you talk about top management, as I was saying before, there's more of an importance associated with leadership as opposed to top management. In the standard, it wants people to be more accountable. So ISO 9000 recognizing that there's a leadership deficit, or there could be wrong personnel in management. You know, there's a book by Jim Collins, I think you should read it, it's called Good to Great. He said one of the most critical things in an organization, there are two things. You set the vision and make sure that you get the right people on the bus. I'm sure in your experience you have seen the wrong persons in management. There's a wrong job fit, and the standard is focusing on forcing the business to analyze leadership. You want to get the best leaders You want to get the right people on the bus, as in the right people in management. And this came about from I think this was initiated or triggered from the global financial crisis, where I'm paying you $100 million and the company has failed. Where is the leadership in that? How do we hold them accountable? Because they have to set the direction and strategy for the company to ensure that the business grows. Now, there were some complaints from top management or staff about senior management performance, as I said before, because of the impact of the global crisis. We are now taking a larger focus on management, and we have seen that quality management does not happen because there's a lack of commitment from leadership. So them focusing on this aspect, no, the implications are there's increased responsibility, and I want to focus on this term called accountability of senior management. I want to make sure that they are more accountable. It's all about leadership and setting direction. What are the implications? Again, there's more risk-based thinking at the management level and less reactive management. So in essence, management become more strategic rather than operationalized. So risk-based thinking focuses on ensuring that management becomes less reactive. And performance of senior management connected to the performance of the organization, that could not be any more true, because we look to our leaders to take us through business growth. And with the removal of the management representative, we want to ensure that leaders or senior management take more ownership of quality. And I'm sure a lot of persons can attest to the fact that the quality managers are the ones who are bearing the burden of quality management, and it was not equally integrated or permeated throughout the senior management team. So this is now forcing all managers to take more ownership of quality, and clearly that is going to lead to better integration of quality across different processes, across the different departments. Now we focus on people, the most important part of any organization. There's one clause that refers to people, just that part, people, and it speaks about determining and provide persons for effective implementation of the QMS and operation of control of its processes. But understand that it goes further. There are other clauses within the standard. It talks about 7.1.6, where it focuses on organizational knowledge, where it speaks to undocumented experience of your people, the undocumented knowledge of your people, your intellectual property. What have you learned? What have your people within your organization learned? In other words, it is forcing you to understand what the organization's knowledge wealth or deficit. Where are you in understanding what you actually have? If you're going to take a loan at the bank, they say, okay, what they want to know what type of collateral you have. So when we speak about organizational knowledge, you must assess your organization and say, what are the knowledge wealth that I have? Or it could be that I have a deficit, because you have undocumented experience, you have undocumented knowledge. It focuses the organization to set up a system for managing knowledge and experience within the organization. It also focuses on building the individual to make sure that the team performs. And I was talking to persons about competency analysis, And what I notice within organization, we are focusing on competency analysis on block. When you're doing competency analysis, it's actually an individual thing. So each person's competence should be assessed. So if you have 100 persons within your organization or 5,000 persons within your organization, believe it or not, you're supposed to understand what each person, each individual within the organization needs. Because if you don't focus on the individual, this chain is as strong as its weakest link. And that one person who has fallen through the cracks could actually have significant impact on your business. So when we speak about competence, we're talking about high requirements, the individual needs assessment, effectively training that individual, verifying that that training is effective, ensuring that that person is performing properly and you're managing that person's performance. The standard also brings about the issue of mentoring that individual, because if we focus on the individual, we're going to build the team or the organization performance. Now, they made a separation in the standard about awareness and training, and it is not supposed to be confused with training. It is more focused on understanding policies, understanding the quality policy, the HR policies or what other relevant policies, but also an awareness of how do I contribute to the overall performance of the organization. Each person should understand their contribution or their role in the growth of the business. They also made reference to communication, and communication, which is always an issue, within an organization. It should be well managed and well structured, and we have to understand the criticality of communication. And the standard brings that out more to say communication has been an issue, there has been a breakdown, and we need to focus more on it. We need to improve the transfer of information. And we have to consider all types of methodologies in communication, whether it be email, whether it's a meeting, taking up the phone and speaking to the colleague. I know as a small business person, I'm conducting a training and one of my subcontractors want to get in touch with me. The easiest form of communication is by WhatsApp, because at that point I can, during break time, I can send a message to say on an important matter. So if WhatsApp is the best methodology that you use, if a meeting is the best one, you have to find the most appropriate methodology for your organization. And please make note that the heading for all of these things is people. It's all about people, their organizational knowledge, their competence, awareness, and making sure that we manage and structure communication with our people. Let us now look at documented information. And the changes are the removal of the quality manual, there's less focus on documentation, and the removal of the mandatory procedures. And let me tell you of the implications, and this is something that is personal to me. Let us look at the first bullet. Understanding that documents are a means to an end. So sometimes when you find companies contracting you to come and help to set up their QMS, they say, I want you to come and document my system. So what they focus on is the documentation. Come and document my procedures. That's a wrong focus. Documents is just the beginning. The procedures are just the beginning for making the change within the organization. So the standard is saying no, there is less of the focus on documentation being the end, but is now being the means to the end, which is the growth of the business or satisfying your customers. Also, you want to focus on the process, develop your procedures, looking at the inputs and the outputs. You don't want to say, okay, because here's a mandatory procedure, I'm going to put this in, and yet you don't see the significance of it. So you want to do more of a process analysis to understand what are the procedures and the records that are needed for your organization. One client said to me, he said, I sell cakes, I don't sell documents. So you have to put in enough, the adequate or appropriate amount of documentation. I don't need a 100-page checklist when my cakes are waiting in the loading bay. I need the right amount of documentation to make sure that I satisfy my customers. People are calling us to come into their organization to detox. They call it the detox, the document detox. I should actually have a service for that. I should start promoting that, where they say, can you come and do a document detox for me? That's a good idea for a service for some of these companies, because what have been done, there's an overburden of procedures that a lot of companies don't use. So we have to understand what is the required documentation for satisfying the customers or for optimum performance, and clearly want to give the companies more flexibility as it relates to documentation. We have also removed the quality manual as well, and there's no reference to the mandatory procedures. We are yet to see how that goes, but I just wanted to focus on the fact that it's documented information and focusing on the appropriate amount of document that we need to put in place. And just to look at this slide here, you want to make sure that you're enhancing or managing risk to enhance performance. You don't want to have too many excessive controls. I'm going to put in a checklist and make sure I check all 110 characteristics and so forth in this, and have excessive controls. I'm going to make sure that you fill out 2 checklists before you release the product. So you want to have an optimum, you want to have your organization performing at its optimum. So if you have too many controls in place, and these controls can come in where you have a lot of documentation and signing off and so forth, but you just want to manage risk, enhance the performance of the organization. Now there's also one other change about referring to the external providers. We don't say suppliers anymore, but we speak about external providers, as I was saying earlier. It could be suppliers, your truckers. You have some people who you outsource certain processes to. So the implications from the standard is that you're now looking at it from upstream, the suppliers, the people who supply the raw materials upstream. You're also looking at your downstream stakeholders. So whether it is your raw materials suppliers, your shippers, your truckers, you want to look at how do they affect your business. So I can make the best product in the world, but if my truckers does not have the proper cold storage or the cold chain, trying to maintain cold chain, when it gets to the customer, we have failed. So we have made all that effort and made the best ice cream in the world, but it is not being transported at the correct temperature. In essence, our QMS has failed because we have not satisfied the customer. So the standard has now looked at the improved integration of the providers, and also focusing on the feedback loop or the communication with these people who affect our business. These stakeholders that have affected our business, we are now doing that feedback loop and focusing a lot more on that. Now, just before I complete the presentation, there are some clarifications or some explanations we speak about analysis and evaluation of data. We're speaking about measurement now, and we're talking about data analysis and evaluation. And I wondered why they put evaluation, and why are they being more prescriptive to say, why are they being more prescriptive by putting evaluation after analysis? Afterward, if I analyze my data, I think that is adequate. But with evaluation, let me give you an example. I can give you the best pie charts in the world, the best bar graphs in the world. But when you speak about evaluation, what does it mean? Now that I know that this is the trend, what are the implications for my business in the next 5 years? So I'm not just analyzing the data, but I'm evaluating to see how it is going to affect my business or how it's going to affect my growth. So it is making it more actionable. It is saying, this is where I should go, this is the direction I should go after I have now done analysis of my data and proper evaluation of my data. Work environment, one clarification is that the work environment is not limited to production, but also to other processes. And there's a clarification about monitoring and measuring resources versus equipment. It is not limited to equipment, but there are other applications that we should monitor and measure. For instance, I can give you an example. I went to a particular organization who has spent about $40,000 for their new software. And when I interviewed the person in charge of this area, he said that, well, this is the capability, but at this point in time, we're now using 50%. It's really, we're using 50% of its capabilities. So my question was, that means you have now wasted $20,000, because if I've spent $40,000 on this software and I'm only using 50% of the capabilities, I've now incurred some amount of waste. So I have to push to use 100% capability of what the software offers. So it is not just focusing on equipment, but due to technological advances, we are now incorporating our communication devices or our software, and we're monitoring and measuring these resources. Now I hope what I've shared with you is something that you can use, you can apply to your business. And I'm so excited to see what the new revisions will bring to our companies or to our businesses, because this is the technical committee responding to what is happening in the world, what is happening to businesses. And I'm glad for the response that the technical committee has given and has brought to the ISO 9001. In another 2 years' time, we'll meet again and share what has been the impact, and I'm sure it will be a positive one. I should give you some homework, but my time is up.
Thank you, Sheryl, for this presentation. Now, with the time left, we will go ahead with questions. Therefore, if you have any questions, it is time to ask them. Please use the comment box or the raise hand function. Thank you. Okay, the first question, Sheryl, here for you is, in the leadership section, from your experience, what advice would you give when wrong personnel in top management are recognized?
When wrong personnel are what?
When wrong personnel in top management are recognized.
I've been in that situation, for instance, as an external auditor, where I had to bring that issue to the senior management team. And it's a very, very difficult situation, but you have to make sure that it is communicated that this person's performance is not up to standard. There has to be some structure in place where management or some objective performance measurement for management and leadership have to recognize that this is an important tool. So the type of tool that you may use to evaluate that person or senior management also becomes important. But the downside is that sometimes people don't take action, and that is where the issue now is. We hope they take action, but we can only recommend that they do.
Thank you. The next question is, being a small business of only 30 employees, is ISO 9001-2015 still relevant or helpful?
Oh, yes, it is. All the tenets within all the requirements in the standard are quite relevant because it focuses on setting your strategic direction, making sure that you have the right management personnel in place, leadership. It speaks about how you carry out your operations, the type of relationship that you have with your suppliers, and also measuring. It's even more significant for a small business because you're the engine of the economy. So whether large or small, all of these are just basic tenets of good management. So it is not, don't look at just call it ISO 9001. This is proper business practices. Anybody who is carrying out, who is going to manage a business need to practice the tenets of the ISO 9001.
Thank you, Cheryl. Another question is, from the tools you mentioned, such as SWOT, Pastel, 5 Forces, etc., what is the best to use in a manufacturing industry?
A combination of, I think it's, I don't want to prescribe because there are many others out there. I like Pastel personally as it relates to examining the external risks. But I use when it's examination of the internal, from the internal context, I like to use a failure mode and effects analysis because it focuses more on the processes, and it makes you zero in a little bit more on examining what are the risks associated with the processes and how to go about treatment options. But I don't want to prescribe it, but in my experience, I've used those tools both in my organization. I also used to work at a certification body, and I've also recommended it to other organizations that I have consulted with.
Thank you. And the last question is, detoxification of documents, as you mentioned, is done for the reason of giving flexibility to companies. Can you give some examples from your experience?
Well, I have done quite a number of auditing in my both from my small business as well as from the certification perspective. And what I find, you may have these humongous amount of procedures and this big manual that persons were not using those procedures, or the procedures were not applicable, or the procedures themselves were too complex. They were almost like a thesis. So that is, and because they are so complex, you find that the employees shunned these procedures and they didn't use them because they clearly are not user-friendly. So you have to go through all these documents and take out what is non-value added. It's not adding any value to your organization. So this document detox may need to happen in order for the company to become more flexible. I'm not using those documents and I don't want to be confined by that. And sometimes when you have these procedures in place and you're not following them, you're getting a lot of non-conformances from certification bodies. When the non-conformances is not adding any, it's really a non-issue. So the detoxification in several organizations have to happen too for some for the transition to be effective. I could tell you a whole lot on that, but you know, it's something that is a very big problem within the organization.
Thank you, Cheryl. Because of the time limited, we have to conclude this presentation. However, if you have any other questions, you can send your questions through email and we will answer to them individually. Thank you again, Cheryl, for this interesting and helpful presentation. Also, I want to thank all the attendees as well for taking the time out of your busy schedules to join us today. We hope you enjoyed the webinar. To keep up with our webinars, please check PECV's webinar schedule in our website, www.pecv.com, or our official social media network, since next week we'll be organizing webinars on interesting topics. Thank you, everyone, and thank you again, Cheryl.
Thank you very much.
Take care.